Hi, this is Corey Jensen. This is Personnel Evaluation Module 14 Case Study. What we know that the principal has evaluated Mrs. Stevens, who is a teacher within the district. He has recommended, or I have recommended, that Mrs. Stevens' contract not be renewed. Mrs. Stevens does not agree and will fight it. Mrs. Stevens believes it was a very unfair evaluation. When this took place over several days in Mrs. Stevens' classroom and in the principal's office. Who is involved is the principal, Mrs. Stevens, more than likely the teachers union, the Board of Education, and superintendent will eventually get involved as well. Legal or ethical issues. There's not really any ethical issues. There could be possible legal battles, as Mrs. Stevens has said. Principal did not put Mrs. Stevens on an improvement plan. That would be the main thing that I would be worried about. Administration support. So Mrs. Stevens is arguing that the administration or curriculum director, instructional leader, whoever, did not support her very well. She does not have tenure, but I think she is still guaranteed some sort of due process. Section 3, synthesize. So Mrs. Stevens does not believe her evaluation is fair and does not think she received the needed support to become a better teacher. So she's saying that she may have some faults in her classroom, but the school district and leaders did nothing to help her in becoming a better teacher and fixing some of those faults that she had. So she believes some of the, if not all of the blame, should go towards them. Section 4, facts. Okay, so the people involved is Mrs. Stevens, the teacher, the principal who conducted the 2 evaluations. The students within Mrs. Stevens' classroom will also be affected by this. And this can be if the principal goes ahead and asks for non-renewal of her contract, her teaching will more than likely suffer. Her attendance might suffer, so overall the students could be affected by that as well. The superintendent, who eventually will get involved. I think the principal will report to the superintendent and say what he had saw with Ms. Stevens as far as evaluation goes, and what he thinks that Mrs. Stevens does not deserve to be renewed, to have her teaching contract renewed. And then ultimately it will go to the Board of Education, who will vote to non-renew Mrs. Stevens or renew her. So this took place in Mrs. Stevens' classroom, where she had both of her evaluations done, and then they also had a post-evaluation meeting in the principal's office. And I'm guessing this is a high school or middle school. The case study did not say, but I'm guessing it's a high school or middle school because Mrs. Stevens teaches one subject. Review. So stakeholders, individuals that are involved would be obviously the school. The community comes into play as well. We don't know what kind of player Mrs. Stevens is in the community. She can be influential. She could spread gossip. She could just spread a whole bunch of negative things about the school, principal, administration, etc. Obviously, you have the principal involved, students, as I talked about, the Board of Education, and the superintendent. All stakeholders have not been consulted, so what we don't know is, has the principal been in communication with curriculum director, instructional coach, superintendent, and board. And we don't know if Mrs. Stevens has a mentor or anything like that, but from what we know, the stakeholders that have been consulted are just Mrs. Stevens and the principal. What more can I learn? So I feel like in this case study, the principal has only observed Mrs. Stevens twice. I guess I would say, can you learn more from evaluating her more, a couple more times? Pop in there and randomly do a walkthrough evaluation. And can I make an informed decision? That's tough when you've only had a couple evaluations under your belt. I would just be a proponent of more evaluation so I can make that informed decision. Options. So what could I do? The first option is nothing. So I would go ahead with a recommendation to non-renew. Second option would be to go ahead with a recommendation to the board. I talked to the superintendent. Those first two options are kind of the same. And then the third option would be work with a teacher and trying to help them. And I would do this a couple ways. I'd put them on an improvement plan. I would try and find a veteran teacher within the school building or district that could be her mentor. And then I would try and find her some professional development on where she lacked. Evaluate. So as far as the first plan, do nothing. Pros of that would be avoid giving an inadequate teacher tenure. So Mrs. Stevens was due for tenure the next year. Second pro would be doing what is best, what I think is best for students. As a principal, you got to keep students in mind. And if you don't think they're getting a good education, then you need to move on from that. And then third, as far as pros go, I'm doing what I believe is best for the students and kids. Cons, teacher culture. So again, we don't know the rapport Mrs. Stevens has with the other teachers. Some teachers could really take this and run with it and create a huge divide within the culture of the school. There could be backlash from the community as well, so she could do the same thing, go out there, talk poorly about the administration, talk poorly about the students, and talk poorly of the school. And then obviously she said she was going to fight this, so she would probably get a teacher union involved and try and tell her side of the story, which is what due process is. Plan number 2, continue with recommendation. Pros, you're doing what you believe is best. And 2, you are holding teachers accountable, which I think is the main thing. Cons, it could be a difficult fight, and I haven't spoken with director of instruction or superintendent. And then third plan, work with a teacher. Pros, it shows that I'm willing to work and support teachers. So I'm not just dismissing them after 2 bad days in the classroom. I'm trying to help them, build them up. Secondly, I'm still holding teachers to a standard, so if they are not performing how they should, we're going to correct it. And then third, it shows compassion. So who knows what's going on with that teacher? Maybe she's having a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, bad year, whatever it is. It's showing compassion. Say, I'm willing to work with you. Cons, it went back on my initial recommendation, so I handed her the sheet that said I would not ask for her renewal. It's going back on that. And is it showing that I'm giving into pressure once Mrs. Stevens got angry about it? Choices. So I believe option 3 is the best choice, where I'm working with her. And maybe that's part of my personality. I don't like to engage in sort of fights and disagreements. So I'm showing concern and compassion for a staff member. It shows I'm willing to work with the teachers and still hold them accountable. I believe this option will also provide more input for all stakeholders, as far as superintendent and other administration within the building, so they can have more say in it as well. And I think that was something that was kind of odd about this, is not having the superintendent involved from the beginning. And then I think a big key would be getting mentors and instructional coaches who can help Mrs. Stevens become a better teacher, because that's all that matters. It boils down to her teaching, and she has a good base of knowledge, but we just make sure she has better classroom management. So the steps I would take with this third option: first, I would talk with my superintendent and other administration within the district and kind of get their feelings on how to proceed as far as supporting this teacher. So I would come up with a plan. Secondly, then I would meet with Mrs. Stevens and I would talk about a remediation plan, whether that would be, weekly check-ins, weekly mentor meetings, whatever it would be. I would just meet with them and lay out the plan that the administration team came up with. I'd also seek a mentor for Mrs. Stevens within the school or district to help support her. She can bounce ideas off of, and maybe she wouldn't be as intimidated with a mentor as she would like an administrator. And I would also schedule regular meetings and observations with Mrs. Stevens, and I would try and approach her and tell her that she shouldn't be intimidated by this. It's just we're here to help, and I think that would be the biggest thing with this whole case study is getting Mrs. Stevens comfortable where she's not in that defensive mode like she was initially in that first meeting, where she wouldn't accept any sort of criticism. She would just get defensive. So I think that is the biggest obstacle in this whole case study. And you can attack that in a couple different ways, but I think the main thing would be setting that culture where she needs to feel comfortable getting observed and being able to take criticism. And then again, if this plan does not work, I would then work towards recommending non-renewal. So obviously, this would be a last resort kind of thing. We would try and work with her as much as possible, try and make sure she is comfortable within the classroom and get her up to where we need to be and hold her to the standard of the school. But yeah, so after all these plans work, the last step would be non-renewal. Thank you.